He stood at the coffin and called me a murderer. Everyone froze. Even the priest stopped speaking. I wanted to shout that he was wrong until the letter arrived, proving he wasn't. The church was silent except for the echo of my son's voice. "You killed him, Dad." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. The word killed didn't belong in a place filled with prayers and lilies. But when I turned, his eyes were burning not with grief, but with conviction. Ethan stood at the far end of the aisle, fists clenched, shaking the light from the stained glass window, cutting across his face like a verdict. People whispered. Chairs creaked. My hand tightened around the edge of the pew. "Ethan," I said quietly, "not here." He took a step forward. "Then where, Dad? You think the truth cares about places?" I wanted to silence him to protect him from what he didn't understand, or maybe to protect myself from what I did. The coffin between us held an old friend, Michael. We hadn't spoken in years, not since that winter when everything went wrong. I thought time had buried that night. I thought silence could absolve me. But my son was digging it up. The priest tried to calm him, murmuring something about respect for the dead. Ethan ignored him. "He trusted you," he said, his voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "And you destroyed him." I looked down, unable to meet his eyes. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't know the whole story, that he was just a boy when it happened. But I remembered the letter that arrived yesterday morning, addressed to me in a handwriting I hadn't seen in 20 years. I hadn't opened it yet. Something in me was afraid to. The service ended in chaos. People avoided looking at me. A few offered hollow condolences, unsure what they were comforting, me for my friend's death or my son's words. Outside, the cold wind carried the sound of distant bells. I found Ethan standing by the graveyard gate, his eyes red. "You think I don't know, but I do," he said. "I read the files. I saw what you did." "What files?" I asked. He glared. "The project reports. The night he died, you were the one who signed the order to shut it down. You cut funding. And his voice broke. He lost everything. Dad, his career, his life." I wanted to argue, to tell him that leadership means making impossible choices, that I didn't kill Michael. I made a decision that saved dozens of others. But when I looked at Ethan, all I saw was the reflection of a man who'd spent decades convincing himself he did the right thing. "Go home, Ethan," I said. "We'll talk later." He shook his head. "No, Dad, not until you admit it." He turned and walked away, leaving me in the wind, surrounded by people who wouldn't meet my eyes. That night I sat alone in my study, the unopened letter on the desk. My hand hovered over it for hours. The paper looked old, yellowed around the edges, like it had been written long ago, and only now decided to find its way home. When I finally opened it, the first line froze me. John, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. And if Ethan ever learns the truth, don't hate him for it. I read the rest in silence. Each sentence was a blade peeling back years of denial. Michael hadn't died in an accident. He hadn't taken his own life out of despair. He'd done it because of a single decision I'd made, one I'd justified as necessary. I leaned back, the letter trembling in my hands. Outside, the rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops against the window pane, like a clock counting down to something inevitable. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. I found another letter, addressed to me. I stared at the screen, the last line of Michael's letter echoing in my mind. If he blames you, let him. He deserves the truth more than I ever did. I realized I wasn't just about to lose my son's respect. I was about to lose the illusion that had kept me alive all these years. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face, not the face in the coffin, but the one from 20 years ago, laughing, alive, full of plans. Back then, we believed we could change everything. He was the idealist. I was the realist. Together, we built something we thought would last forever. Until the day I chose numbers over people. At 3 a.m., I drove to Ethan's apartment. The streets were empty, wet from the rain. Each red light felt like a judgment. I didn't even know what I would say to him. Maybe I just wanted to see his face before the truth changed it forever. When he opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept either. The letter was on the table beside him, already opened. He didn't say a word. He just gestured toward it. Read it, he said. I hesitated. Ethan, read it. The paper was newer than mine, the ink still sharp. I unfolded it slowly. To Ethan. If you're reading this, then your father and I are both ghosts in your story now. Don't judge him too quickly. He did what he thought was right. But sometimes right feels like murder to the ones left behind. Your father didn't kill me with his hands. He killed me with silence. I stopped breathing for a second. The words blurred on the page. Ethan watched me, eyes cold but trembling. I asked him for help. The letter continued. I begged him to stand by me when the board turned against our project. He said he couldn't. That sacrifice was part of leadership. Maybe he was right, but I wasn't ready to be the sacrifice. The page ended there, but Michael's words hung in the room like smoke. I placed the letter down carefully, as if afraid it would burn. I didn't know he wrote to you, I whispered. Ethan's voice cracked. He trusted you, Dad. He looked up to you. You were everything he wanted to be. And when you walked away, it destroyed him. I didn't walk away. I said, my throat tightening. I made a choice. The company was collapsing. If I hadn't pulled the plug, hundreds of jobs would have been lost. And one life was Ethan shot back. The truth was, I had told myself that same story for 20 years, that saving the many justified losing the one. But standing there facing my son, the words felt hollow. They had always been hollow. Ethan sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted you to believe in me, I said quietly. And because I wanted to believe in myself. The clock ticked in the silence between us. Rain tapped against the window, steady as guilt. Ethan finally looked up. You always told me integrity meant owning the truth, no matter how ugly. But you hid yours. I nodded. There was no point defending myself anymore. You're right. His expression softened slightly, but the distance between us was a canyon carved by years of unspoken words. I reached into my coat pocket and took out Michael's letter. He left this for me, I said, handing it over. You should read it too. Ethan hesitated, then unfolded it. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Halfway through, his face changed, the anger fading into something heavier, harder to name. When he looked up, his voice was almost a whisper. He forgave you. I shook my head. No, he just understood me. Ethan read the last line aloud. John, I hope someday you'll stop pretending to be the man everyone thinks you are and just be the man you were when we started. He folded the letter back carefully and set it beside his own. What does that mean? I stared at the rain outside. It means I became what I thought success demanded. And in doing that, I killed the man I once was the same way I killed him. Neither of us spoke for a while. The clock kept ticking, measuring a silence that had been 20 years in the making. Then Ethan said he didn't send these letters by mail, did he? I frowned. What do you mean? He looked at me, eyes narrowing. The handwriting, it's too new. The ink hasn't aged. Someone wanted us to read these now. A chill ran down my spine. You think someone else sent them? I asked. Ethan nodded slowly. Or he planned for them to be found much later. Maybe he wanted to make sure we both faced it when it would hurt the most. I turned the letters over in my hands. On the back of Michael's, there was a faint watermark I hadn't noticed before. A single word barely visible under the lamplight, redemption. Ethan saw it too. Dad, what if he didn't just forgive you? What if he wanted you to finish what you started? The question hung there like thunder, waiting to break. Outside, the first light of dawn bled into the clouds, not golden, not hopeful, just pale and cold. I didn't answer him, because deep down, I already knew what he meant. By morning, the world outside looked clean again, washed by the rain as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something had cracked, open, and refused to close. The letters lay on my kitchen table, side by side, like two mirrors, reflecting a past I'd spent half my life outrunning. I kept reading them over, again and again, until the words no longer made sense, just shapes and guilt. The more I looked, The more I realized Ethan was right. The paper was too white, the ink too dark. The edges hadn't aged. These letters weren't written 20 years ago. They were written recently by someone who wanted us to bleed. A knock on the door pulled me back. Ethan stood there, still in last night's clothes, holding his phone. "Daddy said you need to see this." He showed me a photo. It was of Michael's old handwriting from a project memo archived online, dated 2 decades ago. The handwriting in the letters matched it perfectly. Too perfectly. "Someone forged them," I asked. "Or copied them," Ethan said. "AI could have done this. But why? Who would want to reopen all this now?" I didn't have an answer. But I had a suspicion, one name that had haunted every corner of that old story. David Lang. He'd been Michael's protege, ambitious, brilliant, and dangerously loyal. When the project was cut, David lost his position too. He'd blamed me ever since. We hadn't spoken since the hearing that cleared my name. But I remembered the way he looked at me that day, eyes hollow and voice steady. "You'll get your justice, John. It just won't be when you expect it." I felt a cold tremor crawl up my spine. "Ethan," I said, "we're going somewhere."
"Where?"
"To find a ghost." Lang's office was in a decaying industrial block on the edge of town. The sign out front was rusted, the paint peeling. When we walked in, the air smelled of dust and ink. Old computers hummed softly, the kind used by data forensics specialists. A voice came from the back. "Didn't think you'd ever show up, John." He stepped out of the shadows, older, thinner, with gray streaks running through his hair. But the same sharp eyes. David Lang. Ethan looked at him, confused. "I worked with your father," Lang said, "before he learned how to bury people with spreadsheets." "Enough," I said. "You sent them, didn't you?" He smiled faintly. "No, John, he did." I frowned. "Who?" Lang nodded toward a small monitor on the desk. I turned. On the screen was a scanned image of Michael's signature overlaid with metadata timestamps. The files had been digitally signed just 2 weeks ago. "That's impossible," I muttered. "He's been dead for 20 years. Lang shrugged. "Not dead in data. Michael recorded everything: voice memos, design drafts, notes, emails. When he knew he was finished, he left a digital vault. He set it to trigger automatically if the system detected your name in the news again. Guess what, John? Your keynote last month, that fancy interview about corporate accountability, was enough to wake the dead." My chest tightened. I remembered that interview, how I'd spoken about forgiveness and lessons learned, all the while avoiding the only lesson that truly mattered. Ethan stepped closer to the screen. "So he wanted us to find this?" Lang nodded. "Wanted you to. Wanted your father to remember who he was before ambition made him blind." I turned toward Lang, my voice low. "Why help him? Why now? His expression darkened. Because he asked me to, and because I lost everything too. But I didn't want revenge, John. I wanted you to face what you ran from. He clicked a button. Another file opened an audio recording. Michael's voice, raw and weary, filled the room. John, if the world ever hears this, know that I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean freedom. You must finish what we started. Bring back the truth they buried. Otherwise, what's left of us will rot beneath your silence. Ethan looked at me, eyes wide. Dad, what truth? I couldn't breathe. The memory of that night returned like a storm. The boardroom, lights, the papers I signed, the data we locked away. There was something more than just a failed project, something I had promised to forget. Lang turned off the recording. The files are still out there, he said quietly. The ones that prove everything. But if you open that vault, you'll lose the image you've spent 20 years protecting. The hero, the leader, the man who saved the company. I looked at Ethan, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my son. I saw my judge. He met my gaze. Then maybe it's time the world saw who you really are. I walked out into the gray morning, the wind heavy with the smell of rain. Somewhere in those old archives lay the truth Michael died for, and the key to the redemption I'd never earned. But as I stood there, one thought kept echoing through me like a prayer turned curse. He didn't want to destroy me. He wanted to save me from the man I became. It was 2:17 a.m. when I entered the building that once housed our company's heart. 20 years ago, these walls hummed with ambition, laughter, late nights, coffee cups stacked like small monuments to dreams. Now the place was empty, stripped of everything except ghosts and dust. Ethan followed close behind me. His flashlight beam cut through the dark landing on the old server room door. The metal was rusted, the sign barely legible. Project Helios, authorized personnel only. He glanced at me. This is it. I nodded. My hands were trembling as I slid the old key card into the slot. The light blinked red, then green. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt like a memory waking up. The room inside was colder than I remembered. Racks of dead machines lined the walls, their blinking lights long gone. But in the center, covered by a gray tarp, was the vault, a black terminal, sealed with biometric access. Ethan brushed off the dust. Still running. Barely, I said. But if Michael built this, it'll outlast both of us. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the monitor flickered to lifelines of code spilling across the screen, followed by a single prompt. Hello? John, would you like to continue what we started? My breath caught. The interface wasn't just code, it was him. Michael's humor, his fingerprints, his way of saying hello, even after all these years. Ethan whispered, "This feels wrong." "It is," I said. "But it is the only way." I pressed Y. The system whirred, and a new window opened, a set of encrypted archives labeled Helios Truth. One by one, documents began to decrypt their names, appearing like confessions. Patient trials, suppressed results. Executive Directive 47. Ethan leaned closer. "What is this?" I swallowed hard. The reason he died. We had been developing Helios as an energy prototype, or at least that's what the board believed. But Michael and I had uncovered something deeper. Something dangerous. The project's funding had come from a network of private investors connected to government contracts. They weren't after clean energy. They wanted weaponized applications, a pulse technology capable of disabling power grids, even human neural responses. When Michael found out he wanted to expose them, I didn't. I still remember that night, his voice trembling as he begged me to back him up. "If we stay silent, we're complicit," he said. But silence was easier. I told myself we couldn't win. I told myself survival was wisdom. That night, I signed the order to terminate Project Helios and hand over the assets. The next morning, he was gone. Now the vault displayed the final document, Michael Final Log. I opened it. The screen filled with static for a moment, then his voice came through, soft, weary, uncomfortably alive. "If you're hearing this, John, you finally chose truth over legacy. You once told me that leadership means protecting others from pain. But you can't protect anyone by hiding the fire that burns them. Tell them what we did. Tell them who we became." Ethan stood frozen, listening. "He knew you'd come back," he whispered. I nodded, though my throat was dry. He knew I'd run first. The recording continued. "I left everything. In this vault, every file, every decision we made. If this truth ever sees daylight, it'll ruin powerful men, but maybe it'll save one." The playback ended. Silence filled the room, heavy and absolute. Ethan finally turned to me. "What do we do now?" I stared at the monitor. The system displayed a blinking message. "Upload to public archive Y. One. This was the crossroad Michael had built for me. A chance to end the silence that had defined my life, or to protect the image I'd built from its ashes. Ethan's eyes were on me. "If you walk away again, Dad, I don't know if I can follow you." The words cut deeper than any accusation. Because this wasn't about Michael anymore. It was about the man standing in front of me, waiting to see who I'd finally decide to be. I reached for the keyboard, then stopped. Something blinked in the corner of the screen. An active connection log. User connected David Lang at archives. Ethan's face went pale. "He's watching us." Before I could respond, a message appeared across the interface. "John, don't press it. You don't understand what you're about to release." Lang was in the system, controlling it remotely. "Dad," Ethan said, voice shaking. "What's going on?" I stared at the screen, my reflection trembling in the glass. Somewhere, Between justice and pride, I'd lost my way. And now the ghosts I buried had come back not for revenge, but for judgment. I placed my fingers over the keyboard. "John, if you upload it, they'll come for you too," I whispered. Maybe it's time they did. For a long moment, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, one breath away from ruin. The hum of the server filled the silence, low and steady, like a pulse under the earth. Ethan stood beside me, frozen between fear and faith. I pressed Y. The monitor blinked once, then flared alive with light. Code erupted across the screen lines of green and white, cascading faster than I could read. The system's voice, calm and synthetic, filled the room. Public release initiated. Encryption failsafe active. Lang's voice burst through the terminal speaker. "John, stop it. You're triggering the failsafe. It's not just a data upload. It's a purge." I turned to Ethan, heart pounding. "He's lying." But he wasn't. The next words on the monitor confirmed it. "Initiating secure deletion of all physical backups. Commencing Helios terminal sequence." A low hum deepened beneath the floor. The servers began to glow faint red through their vents, overheating from the inside. Daddy Ethan grabbed my arm. "We have to leave." I pulled the final drive from the terminal, clutching it to my chest. Not without this. A loud crack split the silence. Sparks rained from one of the racks as circuits blew out in sequence, like dominoes of light and fire. Lang's voice was still shouting through the system. "You idiot! Michael didn't build Helios to be released. He built it to self-destruct if anyone tried. He wanted to make sure no one could ever use it again. Not even you." The lights flickered, then died. For a second, the room was black. Only the faint glow of the emergency exit casting slanted shadows on the walls. We ran. The corridors stretched endlessly, each footstep echoing like thunder. Smoke followed us, thick and electric. Somewhere behind us, the vault was burning itself to ash, 20 years of lies devouring themselves in silence. When we burst, outside, the night was soaked in rain. Sirens blared in the distance. I turned back just as the windows of the old building lit up not in flame, but in pure white light. A final silent flash before everything went dark again. Ethan bent over, gasping. "You could have died in there." "I was supposed to," I said quietly. The drive in my hand was still warm, the metal casing blackened. The label read simply, "Helios Final Backup." Ethan stared at it. "So the truth is still here." I nodded, "And now it is ours to carry." He looked at me with something like understanding, or maybe pity. "What are you going to do with it?" I didn't answer. Because for the first time in 20 years, I didn't know. We drove through the night in silence. The rain softened, then stopped. When dawn broke, it painted the horizon in muted gold, the same color Michael used to call the light before forgiveness. Ethan broke the silence first. "If you release it, you'll destroy yourself." I kept my eyes on the road. Maybe destruction's the only honest form of redemption. He turned to me. Do you really believe that? No, I said, but I believe in consequences. I parked the car near the old pier where Michael and I used to walk after work. The place where we promised to never let success make us strangers to ourselves. Now it felt like standing at the end of a prayer we never finished. Ethan followed me out the wind, cutting through our coats. What happens if you send it? They'll come for us. Legally, publicly, maybe worse. And if you don't, I looked at him. Then we become the same men who let Michael die. He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the choice. Then maybe we stop running. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The files opened automatically. Every memo, every name, every decision we'd buried. My reflection stared back at me from the screen, older, hollow, but finally honest. I hit upload. A progress bar crawled across the screen. 12%, 37%, 78%. Then 100%. The files went live. For a second, nothing happened. Then my inbox exploded. Hundreds of alerts, news pings, automatic notifications. Ethan watched the headlines appear in real time. Helios project scandal resurfaces. Evidence of corporate cover-up emerges. Leaked files link former CEO to suppressed fatal incident. I closed the laptop. The sea wind roared in my ears, but my mind was silent. Ethan looked at me. You just burned your life. No, I said softly. I finally told the truth. He stared at me for a long moment, then whispered, Michael would have been proud. I looked out over the horizon. He would have been disappointed it took me this long. The sun broke through the clouds. Then not warm, not merciful, but real. It lit the water in sharp lines of gold and gray, like the world itself was divided between sin and grace. And for the first time in decades, I stood somewhere in between, no longer running, no longer hiding, just breathing in the cost of being free. The world finally knew my truth, and I'd never felt lonelier. By morning, my name was everywhere. News channels, articles, hashtags, faces of anchors I didn't know, dissecting my sins with perfect diction and professional disgust. Former CEO implicated in Helios cover-up. Data leak reveals suppressed fatal incident. Hero or hypocrite. The world loves its monsters neat and its martyrs clean. I was neither. Ethan scrolled through his phone, reading the comments. They're calling you a murderer, he said quietly. Again. I smiled faintly. They're not wrong. He looked up sharply. You did what was right. No, I said. I finally did what was necessary. Outside, cameras waited at the end of the street. Reporters huddled under umbrellas shouting my name. Someone had painted "liar" on the gate in red spray paint. The color looked too familiar, the same shade as the redemption watermark on Michael's letter. I poured coffee, though my hands shook too much to hold the cup steady. Funny, I murmured. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was losing everything. Turns out the worst thing is realizing you deserve to. Ethan came closer. You don't deserve this. You told the truth. I met his eyes. And truth doesn't save you, son. It strips you. By noon, the doorbell wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, former colleagues suddenly rediscovering moral clarity. One of them, Alan, the old board chairman, managed to get past the gate. "John," he said, voice trembling with righteous fury, "you had no right to release those files. Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed lives." "I already did," I said, 20 years ago. He slammed a folder on my table. "There are subpoenas coming? Federal hearings. You think confession makes you noble? You just made yourself the perfect scapegoat." I looked at him and saw what I had once been, a man mistaking survival for integrity. Maybe someone should be. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You'll go to prison for this. Then I'll finally be somewhere I can't run from myself." He left without another word. Ethan stood in the doorway, silent. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not for me, but of me. The kind of fear you have when someone you love walks into fire and doesn't scream. By evening, the government issued a statement. An internal review will be conducted. Translation contained the explosion. Lang called once. I didn't answer. He texted instead. "You wanted redemption. You got crucified." He wasn't wrong either. At 9 p.m., Ethan turned off the TV and said softly, "You could still fight this. Tell them you didn't know." "I did know," I said. "That's the point." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then what happens now?" I took a deep breath. "Now, I stopped pretending to be a victim." Later that night, I went to Michael's grave. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, soft, under my shoes. I stood there, umbrella hanging, uselessly at my side. The city lights flickering beyond the trees. "You were right," I whispered. "About everything, about me." The wind answered, a low hum through the leaves, like a voice remembering. "I thought redemption was about being forgiven," I said quietly. "But maybe it's just about being seen fully without excuses." I took the USB drive from my pocket and laid it on the stone. "The truth's out now, Michael. Maybe it'll set someone free. Maybe not. But at least it's not buried anymore." I turned to leave, but something stopped me. A sound, faint and steady. My phone buzzing in my pocket. A message from Ethan. "They're coming for you. Dad, leave now." I looked back toward the city. Flashing lights were cutting through the fog. Police. Maybe reporters. Maybe worse. I felt no panic, only calm. The kind of calm that comes when you've finally run out of lies to hide behind. I whispered to the gravestone, "You said leadership was sacrifice. I think I finally understand." And for the first time in years, I smiled, not as a man who had won or lost, but as one who had finally surrendered. When the lights reached me, I didn't run. They shouted my name, but I just raised my hands and let the rain begin again. The cold bit into my skin, sharp, honest, unmerciful. Ethan's car pulled up at the end of the road. He didn't get out, he just watched. Our eyes met father and son on opposite sides of the same truth. He nodded once, I nodded back, and as they led me away, I thought of something Michael once said. We can't choose the truth we live with, only the price we're willing to pay for it. I was finally paying mine. The cell was colder than I expected. Concrete walls, a narrow bed, one flickering light that hummed like an insect that refused to die. They took my watch, my belt, my pen, as if removing time control, and words could make me harmless, but they couldn't take silence. And silence, I'd learned, was the only honest companion a man like me deserved. Each morning began the same way, a guard shouting my name. Breakfast sliding under the door, the metallic scrape of keys echoing down the hall. Then hours of nothing, time stretching, bending, folding in on itself. For most men here, silence was punishment. For me, it was confession. Outside, the world was burning with my name. They said I'd betrayed an entire industry, that I'd jeopardized national security, that I'd committed ethical treason. But somewhere in the noise, a quieter current began to rise. Letters started arriving, first one, then dozens. Some were furious, some forgiving. Most began the same way. You don't know me, but a woman wrote that her father had died working under the same company and that the truth gave her peace. A young engineer said he'd quit his job after reading the files, realizing he'd been helping build something that could destroy what he loved. And one line from a stranger struck deepest of all. Thank you for teaching us that telling the truth isn't about being right. It's about being ready. I kept that one folded in my pocket. Ethan visited once a week. He'd walk through the metal detector carrying a notebook and eyes that had seen too much for their age. People are calling you a whistleblower, he said once, half smiling. Some even call you a hero. I laughed quietly. Hero is just another word for someone they haven't seen bleed yet. He leaned forward, his voice soft. They've started petitions. Journalists are questioning the government's role. Lang disappeared. Some think he's hiding. I nodded. He'll resurface when it's convenient. And you, Ethan asked. You're just waiting. I looked at him and said, waiting isn't passive, Ethan. It's a kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need noise to stay alive. He studied me for a long time, then whispered, You seem lighter. I am, I said, because the truth doesn't weigh me down anymore. It just stands beside me. Days turned into weeks. The hearings began. They broadcast my testimony live. I stood in the courtroom in a plain gray suit, no tie, no defense team that tried to spin my story. The prosecutor read the charges: unauthorized disclosure, corporate negligence, conspiracy to defraud investors. When the judge asked if I had anything to say before sentencing, I said. Only this I did. What I should have done 20 years ago. I didn't tell the truth to be free. I told it so others could stop living in my lie. The courtroom fell silent. No one clapped. No one spoke. But in that silence, something shifted. Small, invisible, irreversible. Later, a guard whispered as he led me back to the van, "You did the right thing, sir." It wasn't sympathy, it was acknowledgement. Months passed, seasons blurred. Then one morning the warden came to my cell holding a newspaper. "You might want to see this," he said. The front page showed a photo of Ethan at a press conference standing behind a podium, holding the same USB drive I'd given him before the arrest. The headline read, "Son of former CEO continues father's mission for transparency reform." My hands trembled as I read his words. My father didn't fall from grace. He walked into it. Because grace isn't clean, it's the courage to face the dirt and stand still. I sat there for a long time, the paper spread across my knees, and felt something rare peace. For the first time I realized that redemption doesn't happen when the world forgives you. It happens when you stop demanding that it should. That night, I looked out through the small window above my bed. The moon was pale, distant, and perfect. I imagined Michael, somewhere beyond it, watching quietly, amused at how long it had taken me to understand what he'd meant. All along, I whispered into the dark, "You were right again, old friend." The truth didn't save me, but it saved my son. Outside the walls, I could almost hear the sea, the same muted gold of dawn breaking somewhere far away. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel trapped. I felt home. The envelope arrived without a return address. Old paper rough to the touch, the kind that holds time like a scar. The guard handed it to me during morning roll call, his eyes lingering as if he sensed the weight it carried. I knew the handwriting instantly, Michael's. For a moment, the world inside the cell blurred. The walls, the bars, even the sound of footsteps in the corridor, all dissolved into that looping signature I hadn't seen in decades. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet folded 3 times, sealed with wax. The color faded crimson, the same shade of redemption. John, if you're reading this, it means the truth finally saw daylight. I could have left you another apology, another explanation. But what I owe you now isn't forgiveness, it's clarity. My hands trembled. The words bled through the page like they'd been waiting too long to be spoken. You think you failed me. You didn't. You failed the illusion that men like us could stay clean in a world built on compromise. You carried that illusion longer than anyone should, and for that I pity you, not blame you. I closed my eyes. His voice came alive between the lines, calm, steady, too human to be gone. When I left that night, I wasn't running from you. I was running toward something I couldn't reach, the belief that truth could survive without love. I was wrong. It can't. My throat tightened. The cell blurred again. You'll think this letter is about redemption. It's not. Redemption isn't a finish line, John. It's a relay. You pass the truth forward, and someone else carries it when you can't. That someone is your son. I froze. The air left my lungs. Michael had written this letter before he died, before Ethan was even old enough to read. He had seen everything that was about to happen. The guilt, the silence, the inheritance of conscience. I met him once, the letter continued. He was just a boy, waiting in your office after school, sketching rockets in your old notebook. He told me he wanted to make light for people who were afraid of the dark. Remember that? You laughed? I didn't. Because I knew one day he'd become the light you couldn't. I set the letter down, staring at the concrete floor. A sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. Ethan must have found this letter in the archives after I was arrested. Maybe he'd read it. Maybe that's what drove him to stand before the world and speak the truth louder than I ever could. The last line were written in darker ink, as though Michael's hand had pressed harder, or his heart had. You once told me you didn't believe in fate. But you should have known. Men like us are never punished by the world. We're punished by the parts of ourselves that still remember who we were before success made us hollow. Don't spend your last years apologizing for silence. Use them to teach your son how to speak. And when he finally does, don't be afraid if his voice is louder than yours. That's how truth survives. I folded the letter, pressing it to my chest. For the first time in my life, tears came easily, not as confession, but as recognition. The guard outside the cell door said quietly, "Mr. Miller, are you all right?" I wiped my face and smiled faintly. Yes, I think I finally am. That evening, I turned on the small television in the common room. The channel was showing a live broadcast, a public forum on ethics in technology hosted by the National Commission. Ethan was on stage. My son standing straight, calm, the same slow confidence I'd once mistaken for naivety. He was reading from a piece of paper. My father taught me that silence protects power, not people, and that sometimes truth has to burn a man's name so the world can see its reflection in the ashes. The crowd was silent. Then the applause came, hesitant at first, then growing until it filled the hall like the sound of a tide returning. He looked up, then straight into the camera. For a split second our eyes met through the screen, and I could swear he was speaking to me alone when he said, "He didn't destroy his life. He lit the path for mine." Back in the cell, I turned off the TV. The hum of the light above me faded into quiet. I took Michael's letter and placed it on the small desk. Next to it, I wrote my own, a single line meant for Ethan. "Don't inherit my guilt. inherit my courage. Then I folded it, placed it inside the same envelope, and sealed it with the wax that had cracked from Michael's hand to mine. The color of blood, truth, and redemption intertwined. Outside thunder rolled across the horizon. Inside, for the first time, I felt something more powerful than forgiveness. Legacy. The guard's voice broke the quiet. Visitor for you, Miller. I didn't ask who. I already knew. It had been 3 weeks since Ethan's public speech, the one that turned my sins into his cause. Since then, letters came from people who said my story changed them. But I hadn't seen my son, not once. I didn't blame him. He had a world to carry now. When I stepped into the visiting room, the light was low, and the air smelled of disinfectant and dust. The glass between us reflected my own face, first older, calmer, almost unrecognizable, before his appeared on the other side. He looked different, lighter somehow, like he'd stopped fighting the shadow of my name and started walking in his own. We sat without speaking for a long while. The silence wasn't heavy. This time it was full, like a held breath neither of us wanted to end. Finally, Ethan said, "They offered you early release. Why didn't you take it?" I smiled faintly. Because freedom without completion isn't peace. And I still have something to finish. He frowned slightly. Finish what? I took the folded envelope from my pocket, Michael's letter, and mine tucked inside it. You remember the man I told you about, the one who believed truth couldn't live without love? He nodded. This was his last message. He wrote it before he died, and now it's yours. Ethan hesitated. Why me? Because he said redemption is a relay, I said softly. And I think he meant you were the next runner. He opened the envelope carefully. His eyes moved slowly over the words, his lips parting just enough for me to see the tremor in his breath. When he reached the line about the rockets he used to draw in my office, he looked up at me, eyes wet. I don't remember saying that. You were 6, I said. You didn't have to remember it. You lived it. He smiled, that small, quiet smile that used to belong to his mother. You know, I used to think you were invincible, that nothing could touch you. And now sitting here, I realize that's the best thing that could have died. I chuckled softly. Invincibility is just fear wearing armor. Ethan leaned closer, pressing his hand to the glass. I'm proud of you, Dad. The words landed with the force of something sacred. I didn't reach out. I just nodded once, slowly. Then I've already served my sentence. We sat in silence again. Outside the window, afternoon light spilled across the floor, a muted gold fading into gray. The same colors that had followed me my whole life. He spoke again, voice lower this time. They want me to run a foundation for transparency and ethics in tech. I said, yes. You're continuing it, I said. No, he answered. I'm starting it again, but this time with love, not anger. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. before I could stop it. Then Michael was right about you. He looked puzzled. About what? That you'd become the light I couldn't. Ethan smiled through the glass. You still can, Dad, just in a smaller sky. The phrase struck something deep inside me, simple, true, final. He stood then, the letter still in his hand. The guard signaled the time was up. I'll come back next week, he said. I nodded. Bring stories, not sympathy. He laughed lightly. I've got plenty of both. As he turned to leave, I said quietly, Ethan. He looked back. Whatever the world says about me, make sure it doesn't stop you from forgiving yourself someday, too. His expression softened. You mean for believing in you? For needing to, I said. He pressed his palm to the glass one last time. I mirrored it, feeling the warmth through the cold barrier, a bridge built out of silence and forgiveness. Then he was gone. That night I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling. The lights dimmed to half, and the cell was filled with a strange peace. The letter's absence from my pocket felt like release, as if something had finally completed its circle. I whispered into the quiet, You were right, Michael. The truth didn't save me. It passed through me. Somewhere far beyond these walls, I imagined Ethan speaking again, not in my shadow, but in his own light. And I smiled, knowing that for the first time in my life, my silence was no longer a burden. It was a bridge. They say time moves slower behind bars. They're wrong. It moves differently, not in hours or days, but in reckonings. Each morning feels like a quiet conversation between who you were and who you're trying to be. Today marks 1 year since my arrest. The papers say my name less now. The noise has faded. The world has moved on, as it should. But in this small room, the silence has ripened into something I never expected understanding. I sit by the window, writing. The paper is thin, the pen dull. The sunlight cuts through the bars, scattering in fractured lines across the wall like a broken halo. Outside the courtyard hums with distant voices. Inside, I hear only one, my own steady and calm. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the wound. It's about remembering who bled first. That's the line I write at the top of the page, not as wisdom, but as confession. They'll let me out soon. Early release, they said, for good behavior and public goodwill. I almost laughed when I heard it. The irony of being called good after a lifetime of careful, moral accounting. But maybe that's what life is, a long ledger of debts, and redemption isn't about balancing it. It's about closing it, knowing some numbers will never add up. I received another letter this morning. No name. Just 2 words written in Ethan's handwriting. Keep going. I smiled when I read it, because for the first time I knew I wasn't the one moving forward. He was. He'd built the foundation, gathered a team, launched the Helios Truth Initiative. They were teaching young engineers about ethics, accountability, courage. He'd taken the fire that burned me and turned it into light. Michael once said truth is a relay. I used to think he meant endurance, the act of surviving. But now I know it's about surrender. Passing the torch when your hands are no longer steady enough to hold it. The guard knocks softly on the door. 5 minutes, Miller. I nod, thank you. He lingers for a moment. My son watched your son's speech. He said it made him want to be better. I smile. Then it was all worth it. When he leaves, I fold the paper I've been writing on my final page. On the back, I add a note for Ethan. Don't chase being right. Chase being whole. The world needs fewer righteous men and more honest ones. I slip the page into an envelope, the same one that carried Michael's words years ago. The wax seal has long since cracked, but I leave it that way because nothing true stays unbroken. The afternoon light deepens, shifting from gold to ash. I close my eyes, feeling it warm my face through the bars. For a moment, I imagine I'm back at the pier, the sea breathing slow, the sky wide and merciful. Michael standing beside me, smiling. Ethan, a boy again, drawing rockets in the sand. I speak softly, half to them, half to the silence. Maybe we never really escape our past. Maybe we just learn to walk beside it. A pause. Then another thought, quieter, truer. And maybe the only justice that matters is becoming someone you can forgive. The door opens. The guard nods. It's time. I stand sliding the envelope into my pocket. As I step into the corridor, the light from the setting sun floods the floor, fractured, imperfect, beautiful. I walk through it slowly, each step echoing like a closing prayer. Outside, beyond the gates, I see him waiting. Ethan. He doesn't wave. He doesn't speak. He just smiles, the kind of smile that says it's over but not forgotten. The kind of smile that carries both the wound and the wisdom. I breathe in the evening air. It smells of rain and clean metal, and the faint sweetness of something ending right. And as I walk toward him, one truth settles quietly in my chest. Not heavy, not sharp, just certain. We spend half our lives running from the man we were, and the other half learning how to sit beside him in peace. The gate closes behind me with a dull metallic thud. The sky opens above, wide gray and gold. And for the first time in 20 years, I feel free.